Hey, Redeeming Hope. Hey, guys. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining me live on my back porch. I've got the dogs coming around, and I bet you I was literally about ready to say my dog's going to take a big slurp of water right when I start live, and that's exactly what he's doing. So anyway, you can hear that in the background. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm sitting out here. Actually, Rachel's sitting on the couch opposite of me. She didn't want to jump on the live stream today. That's okay. She's studying for a test on Monday. And our dogs are out here. We're doing what we call hot boxing with the dogs. So we just like literally get them super hot. So in the wintertime, we'll turn like the heat up real high, and they'll just lay in front of the heat. And in the summer, what we'll do is we'll sit outside and encourage them to stay out here with us. We'll just set some water out. And like after about 15 or 20 minutes, man, they're dead asleep. So Toa's just starting to get up, but my big dog, my little puppy Kuba, who's not a little puppy anymore, he's got a branch about the width of his body that he pulled up on the couch and is just chewing it. So anyway, it's been a pretty busy day for us. Rachel's studying, like I said, for a test, and I've had a couple, about 7 or 8 different meetings today and phone calls. But I wanted to pop on here and share with you a little bit about what God's been shared with me this week. I was reminded as I was talking with a friend of mine. I think it was a couple of days ago, and I was talking to him about a really difficult time I had back in the fall. There was a couple of things that happened. Some things didn't work out. Some ministry partnerships that I thought were going to work that didn't, and I was pretty discouraged, to be quite honest. I was pretty upset, and I was reading in 2 Corinthians, and there's something that God spoke to me that I wanted to really just share with you today. And so, hey, you both of you, this is what they're doing right now. They're like fighting over a stick. So I wanted to share with you this passage of scripture, and I was just reminded of how God spoke to me a couple of months ago. And I guess it was more than a couple months ago. It was in the fall of 2019. And I wanted to share this with you. And it's Paul, and he's praying, and he just finished talking about like having these incredible experiences where he just saw these incredible visions of God's grace and God's glory. And then he says this, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. And so he pretty much says, like, in order to keep him humble, God gave him an ailment of some sort. And most commentators believe that it was a physical ailment, and some people even believe that it was an eye issue, because he constantly had to have scribes write for him. And he even says at the end of one of his letters, he says, "See in what large letters I write to you with my own hand." And so we kind of deduct from that he was unable to see very well, and so he had to write really large. So anyway, we see that he was given some sort of ailment, potentially a physical ailment, and it says to keep me from becoming conceited. And then it goes on. He says in verse 8 of 2 Corinthians 12, he says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. So 3 different times he said, God, please take this away from me. Please help me. Please get this out. And he said, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Power made perfect in weakness. And I tell you guys, there is nothing more countercultural, there's nothing more counter-American than that idea. Power being made perfect in weakness. God says there's something about our weakness that takes his power and perfects it. It takes his power and matures it to the point of even greater effectiveness in the midst of our weakness. And this is something that you hear me talk about pretty consistently. But this idea of being weak and coming before God in a sense of weakness is really something that has really changed my life over the past 2 years. Planting this church, I'm learning what it looks like to be weak. I'm learning what it looks like to not have my crap together. I'm learning what it looks like to just say, I have no clue what I'm doing. And it is in these times that I think that God is the most apt to work and the most apt for his power to be expressed. And so he says, my grace is sufficient for you. And I guess I just have a question for me and a question for us today. Do we perceive God's grace as enough? Do we live our lives in light of God's grace? And do we truly understand God's grace? Because I think so often I thought I understood it. I thought I had it together. And you would even hear me say, yeah, I got it together. I'm good. I get grace. I understand grace. I know all about that. But it's those times where you know that you know the least really about grace. Grace is something that just, as you know it more, it begins to astound you even more. And as you see your own brokenness, and as I see my own brokenness, grace becomes all the sweeter. It becomes all the more important for the life of the Christian. And so my question for us today is are we able to say with integrity that God's grace is sufficient? And what is keeping us? What things do we have in our life? What barriers do we have to seeing God's grace is sufficient? Is it success at our jobs? Is it having a put together family? Is it having that perfect marriage that everybody looks at from the outside and says, oh, it's so great? Maybe it's having those really well-behaved kids, but, behind closed doors, they're just kids like everybody else, or whatever it is that seeks to draw our identity away from Christ is what distracts us from the grace of God and what helps us maybe not be able to see God's grace in its fullness. And so my question for us is what's preventing us from seeing God's grace is sufficient today? And also it says, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And so I guess my question for us in light of that is, where are you weak? Where is God's power being perfected in you right now? That's where it is. It's being perfected in your weakness. And so is there areas that you think you're strong at? Is there areas that you think you're good at? Because I know that there's a lot of areas that I think I'm good at. And when I actually take a step back and look, I find that I'm not. And so I just want to encourage you guys today that God's power is perfected in your weakness. His grace truly is sufficient for our needs. And then the action that Paul says, so Paul says, this is what God said to me. And then he goes on to say, this is now what I'm going to do about it. And then he says, therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest on me. So then he says, so Paul believes this, right? So Paul believes that God's grace is sufficient, that his power is made perfect in weakness. And so then Paul says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to boast, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to highlight my weaknesses so that God's grace will be perfected in me. And you see, my question is, where are you and where are we highlighting our weaknesses this week? Where are we coming to the table in light of God and his grace and saying, God, I'm weak here. I need your power. And actually, that's when God's power is perfected. And so that's what I want to encourage us with today is maybe we should really, truly, honestly wrestle with the idea that God's power is made perfect in weakness. And then maybe our response to that weakness is not to hide it, not to get angry when other people expose our weaknesses, not even to get upset when other people show us our deficiencies, but maybe instead of trying to hide or feeling guilt or shame, maybe we need to embrace them. Maybe we need to embrace our weakness so that God's power can be perfected in it. Somebody asked me what I'm studying, 2 Corinthians 12, verses 8 to 10. So I had somebody on Twitch asking me what I was studying. And that's 2 Corinthians 12, verses 8 to 10. And then it says, therefore I boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, the power of Christ may rest on me. Then it says, for the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. It says, for the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So we see that Paul actually believes that God's grace is sufficient for him. He believes that God's power is made perfect in Paul's weakness. And then he says, I'm going to boast about my weakness. And then he says, because of this, for the sake of Christ, for the sake of God's power being perfected in me, I can be content. So he has a belief in that what God is saying is true. He has an action that follows that belief by boasting in his weaknesses. And then he has a product that comes out of his action. And the product that comes out of his action is contentment. And so he says, I can be okay in whatever situation I'm in. And my friends, I don't know if you're like me. I want to be okay in whatever situation I'm in, and often I'm not. Often I get frustrated. Often I get upset. Often I get really frustrated when things don't go my way. But what happens is that I can be content when I learn to celebrate my own weaknesses. And so a question was, his action was boasting. So there was a question mark there. And it says, sounds like he learned humility, and in humility he found grace. And you said, you're exactly right. That's what that word boasting here means. I know it might not be, it's not the same exact wording as how we would use boasting in the English language. Remember, this is in Greek and it was translated. So when he says, therefore I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, what Paul is essentially saying is, I'm going to highlight my weaknesses. I'm not going to celebrate how strong I am. I'm actually going to, in humility, and you're exactly right, in humility, underneath the grace of God, what he says is, I'm going to be so on the other end of self-sufficient. I'm going to even celebrate my weaknesses so that God's power can be perfected in them. So it's like Paul swinging the pendulum the other way. Instead of being prideful in his own work, he says, I'm even going to celebrate my weaknesses, because in my weaknesses, that's when God is strong. And so, guys, thank you so much for tuning into our live stream today. I love you. Remember, at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, we gather together online. You can go to our website at redeeminghope.org/live. You can also find us live on Facebook and YouTube. We'll also do a live Q&A at 11 a.m. Central Time, where we can actually go live and ask questions. So we're going to be doing the sermon at 10, and then at 11 a.m. a live Q&A. And I will not have my dogs around me, and I won't have them lapping up water. We actually do it inside, so it's less distracting. But this is a little bit more informal because it's midweek. And I just want to invite you guys to join us. I have this dog's tail right in my face right now. Invite you to join us. If there's anything we can do to serve you as a church, text us 931-326-4512. If you want to get into a group with us, regardless of where you are in the country or even in the world, you can join us for a group, and we'd love to see you guys soon. Love you guys. Thanks so much.